deepens, Lord, with me aboard. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me.
Recently, my wife and I had the pleasure of dining with some good friends at an excellent Italian restaurant in Johannesburg. He is one of South Africa's leading businessmen, and as he weaved his way through the tables, I couldn't help notice how many people jumped up to greet him, almost obsequiously shaking his hand, laughing loudly at his jokes. And at dinner, he spoke about the huge amount of work that he was currently doing as he prepares his company for a public listing, the third of his highly successful career. They mentioned that they were flying down to Tulbagh in the Cape for a wedding tomorrow in their private jet because they wanted to be back in Johannesburg for the Easter celebrations on Sunday. A young gentleman came over to our table to shake my friend's hand and was introduced to my wife and I as the head of Standard Bank, one of South Africa's biggest banks. Well, my friends, why am I telling you this? I think that I must admit that I found it all a bit overwhelming, in a good and exciting way, of course, but I was overwhelmed. And then in preparation for this reflection, I began to consider how many times in my life I have been overwhelmed, not just in good and exciting ways, but also in bad and frightening ways. I think I've mentioned to you before that I spent 12 years in the army, in the artillery, and there were many occasions, especially on the borders, that I could only describe as overwhelming. And a few years ago, some robbers broke into our house in the middle of the night. They stabbed me in the back, tied my wife and I up with our hands behind our backs, and cleaned us out. They stole every single piece of my wife's jewelry, her engagement ring, her wedding ring, little pieces that I had bought her for anniversaries over the years, on the birth of our children, items that she had inherited from both her and my families. And I remember lying trussed up, hands behind my back, bleeding all over the linen, how helpless, how completely overwhelmed I felt. And my dearly beloved father passed away this week 25 years ago. And I still remember to this day how frustrated I felt by all the doctors and specialists not being able to do anything to save him as he quietly slipped away from us. Think back over your life, and I'm sure that you can think of several similar events and circumstances. You know, a unique thing can happen to us when we are overwhelmed. When the burden of it prostrates us in weakness, leaves us almost sweating blood, it's then that God's strength can flow into us most deeply. Most people have experienced this, not least of all Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before his crucifixion. Martin Luther King, for example, recounts his own agony in the garden and how an angel came to strengthen him.
But I never will forget one night very late. It was around midnight. And you can have some strange experiences at midnight. The telephone started ringing and I picked it up. On the other end was an ugly voice. That voice said to me in substance, "Nigger, we are tired of you and your mess now. And if you aren't out of this town in 3 days, we're gonna blow your brains out and blow up your house."
I hung up, he said, but I couldn't sleep. It seemed that all of my fears had come down on me at once. I had reached saturation point. So I got out of bed and began to walk the floor. Finally, I went into the kitchen and I heated a pot of coffee. I was ready to give up. With my cup of coffee sitting untouched before me, I tried to think of a way to move out of the picture without appearing to be a coward. In this state of exhaustion, when my courage had all but gone, I decided to take my problem to God. With my head in my hands, I bowed over the kitchen table and I prayed aloud. The words that I spoke to God that midnight are still vivid in my memory. I said, "I'm here taking a stand for what I believe is right. But right now I'm afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership. And if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. Lord, I am at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I've come to the point where I can't face it alone." And at that moment, I experienced the presence of the divine as I had never experienced him before. My friends, one of the lessons of the Garden of Gethsemane is that only after we have let the desert do its full work in us will angels finally come and minister to us. It's only after the desert of loneliness, of duty, of helplessness, when they have done their work in Jesus, that an angel from heaven came and ministered to him. The parallel between Martin Luther King's story and Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is so obvious that it's superfluous to elaborate on it. God sends angels to strengthen us precisely when God finds us lying, prostrate, sweating the blood of duty. Moreover, that particular kind of sweat does something else for us as well. In the Gethsemane accounts, we're told that right after being strengthened by the angel, Jesus gets up off the ground and he walks with courage to face the ordeal that awaited him the next day. His agony and the strengthening he receives within it readied him for the pain of crucifixion that laid ahead. Indeed, at the time of Jesus, the word agony had a double sense. Beyond its most obvious meaning, it also referred to a particular readying that an athlete would do just before entering an arena or a stadium. An athlete would ready himself. In those days, the athlete normally was a he. For the context, he worked up a certain sweat with the idea that this exercise and lather it produced would concentrate and ready both his energies and his muscles for the rigors that lay ahead. No athlete wants to enter a contest unprepared, unready. And the gospel writers want us to have the same image of Jesus as he leaves the Garden of Gethsemane. His agony has brought about a certain emotional, physical, spiritual lather, so that he is now readied. He's a focused athlete, properly prepared to enter the battle. Moreover, because of his strengthening, brings a certain divine energy. He is indeed more ready than any athlete. Christina Crawford, writing about a low time in her life, once commented, "Lost is a place too." Indeed, biblically, it is a very important place. It's the place where angels can come and minister to us. And it's the place that readies us for the great spiritual battles. When our own strength gives out, when the pain of duty seems too much, when we lie prostrate in weakness, bleeding in our beds, and cringe before what truth and justice and God seem to be asking of us, when we've come to the point where, like Martin Luther King, we can no longer face it alone, when we are completely overwhelmed, then we're finally at that place where angels can minister to us. And we finally worked up the spiritual lather that has readied our souls and our bodies for the Good Fridays that await each and every one of us. My brothers and sisters, God bless you.
Abide with me.